My sister made all 7 bridesmaids wear beautiful lavender gowns. She gave me a different dress, bright orange, size 2XL. It was the only one left, she said, smiling. Parents told me to stop being dramatic. At the reception, the groom's grandmother walked up to me. She took my hand and said 6 words that made my sister leave her own wedding. My name is Claire Mercer, and I was 34 years old the day my sister handed me a dress the color of a construction barrel. 7 women stood in the bridal suite that morning, slipping into identical lavender gowns, fitted, floor-length, the kind of dress you actually keep. I stood in a linen closet down the hall holding 4 pounds of bright orange polyester that smelled like the inside of a shipping container and had a size tag that read 2XL. I wear a small. I pinned the waist with a safety pin I found in my travel kit. The pin held for about 40 minutes before the fabric started bunching again. I pressed my elbow against it for the rest of the night, the way you hold a wound closed when there's nothing else to work with. When I found Tara in the bridal suite and asked about the dress, she tilted her head and smiled. That exact smile. The one she's been using since she was 9 years old to communicate that whatever is happening to you is, at its core, your own fault. It was the only one left, she said. My mother, standing behind her, nodded. Stop being dramatic, she said. It's one day. Here's what I want you to understand before I tell you what happened at the reception. The orange dress was not a mistake. It was not an oversight. It was not the result of a vendor mix-up or a miscommunication or a size chart error. I know this because 2 nights earlier, at the rehearsal dinner, I found my mother's phone lighting up with a group chat called Bennett Girls, and I made the mistake of reading it, but I'll get there. First, you need to understand what kind of family casually hands their eldest daughter a clown suit and then tells her not to make it weird. I'm a nurse practitioner. I co-own a primary care clinic in Asheville, North Carolina, called Ridgeline Health. 4 providers, 2 locations, 2,200 patients. I opened it 4 years ago with my business partner Dana after 8 months writing the business plan and 6 months being rejected for small business loans. When I finally got approved, $180,000 at 6.2%. I paid myself $38,000 my first year and ate a lot of rice and beans and drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard. It's mine in the way that things only are when you built them from nothing and carried all the risk yourself. I say this because Tara told Marcus's family she built it. I'll get there. I grew up in Greensboro. My parents are Diane and Glenn Bennett. She manages a regional insurance office. He's a retired high school vice principal. They are not bad people. They are people who made a choice repeatedly across 20-something years to prioritize one daughter's comfort over the other's dignity and called that choice love. Tara is 4 years younger. She dropped out of a liberal arts college in Savannah after 3 semesters. She quit an online certification program after 1. She has worked as a barista, a boutique associate, a social media manager for a restaurant that closed, and a yoga instructor for 4 months. She is 30 years old and carries $47,000 in credit card debt, plus a personal loan co-signed by our parents. She met Marcus Whitmore at a fundraiser gala 18 months ago, and she recognized immediately what the Whitmore family represented: a floor, a way out from under all of it. Marcus is a good man. I want to say that clearly because what happened at his wedding was not his fault. He works in commercial real estate, coaches youth lacrosse on Saturdays, and talks about his grandmother Eleanor the way people talk about the one person in their life who has never lied to them. Eleanor Whitmore is 78, silver-haired, posture like a steel beam. She has served on the boards of 3 hospitals and 2 arts foundations. At the rehearsal dinner, she sat at the end of the Whitmore table with her hands folded over her cane and watched the room the way some people watch weather. She caught me watching her once, held my gaze for 3 seconds, then looked at Tara, then back at me. I didn't know what to do with that. I was busy surviving the evening. I drove back to my hotel at 10:15 and sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on. Tomorrow was the wedding. I'd stand where they told me, smile when the camera pointed, and leave before the bouquet toss. That was the plan. My grandmother, Ruth Mercer, died 18 months before Tara's wedding. She was 81, and she spent her last 2 years in my guest bedroom on Kalmia Street in a rented hospital bed with a remote for the elevation angles because lying flat had become painful. She had COPD and a series of small strokes that affected her balance and eventually her short-term memory. She knew who I was until the final week. On the last night, she wasn't sure, but she held my hand anyway. I moved her into my house because the alternative was a memory care facility 40 minutes away that cost $6,800 a month. I am not dismissing those facilities, but Grand had spent her adult life in her own house with a garden she tended and a kitchen she ran, and I had a spare room and the medical training to manage her care, so I did. I converted the guest room, installed grab bars, rearranged my clinic schedule to be home by 6, hired a daytime aide named Paulette for weekdays. I covered evenings, weekends, and the nights when Grand woke up at 2 or 3 in the morning confused and frightened and needed someone to sit with her and explain, patiently and repeatedly, that she was safe, that she was home, that I was right there. I did this for 2 years and 3 months. Tara visited 4 times. 3 of those she left before dark. At the funeral, Tara gave the eulogy. It was beautiful. She talked about Grand's garden and her cornbread and the way she called everyone sweetheart. She cried at the podium. Several women in the front rows cried with her. My mother squeezed Tara's hand when she sat back down. Nobody asked me to speak. I sat in the 3rd row and thought about the last thing Gran said to me that made clear sense 3 weeks before she died. She'd had a good morning, alert, oriented. She looked at me from the bed and said, "You didn't have to do all this, you know." I told her I knew. She said, "I want you to know that I know." I told her that was enough. I've thought about that almost every day since. It was just 2 people being honest with each other about what had passed passed between them, without needing anyone else in the room, which is part of why, when Tara stood at her wedding reception telling the Whitmore family that she had been the one who nursed our grandmother through her final days, I didn't immediately stand up and correct her. I know how that sounds. Stay with me. Let me tell you about the clinic, because it matters to the rest of this. Ridgeline Health runs on a direct primary care model. Patients pay a monthly membership and between $49 and $89, and in exchange they get unlimited same-day appointments, transparent pricing, and providers who actually have time to know them. No insurance billing games, no 15-minute slots that leave everyone feeling half-helped. Building it required a business plan 8 months in the making, a $180,000 loan I was rejected for twice before approval, $22,000 in personal savings, and roughly 2.5 years of 12 to 14-hour days while simultaneously credentialing, negotiating a lease, hiring staff, and building a patient panel from zero. In year 1, I paid myself $38,000 and deferred salary for the first 6 months entirely to keep the practice liquid. In year 4, Ridgeline has 2,200 patients and 2 locations and was written up in a regional healthcare journal. The headline called us a quiet revolution. I keep a copy in a folder in my filing cabinet and look at it sometimes when the financing projections are making me want to quit. I tell you all this because at Tara's reception, while I was sitting at table 11 by the kitchen door, I heard my sister tell Marcus's great-aunt Patricia that she had built a primary care practice from the ground up, that it was her idea, that she believed in serving underserved communities, that it had been brutal work. She touched her collarbone and said she believed in earning your place. Earlier that evening, before the reception, in the hallway outside the bridal suite, I'd heard her on the phone running through talking points, the clinic, the overnight shifts, the mission-driven model. She had the cadence of someone who had memorized something and was warming up the delivery. I stood in the hallway and listened to my own life story being rehearsed in my sister's voice. I didn't confront her. I went back to the end of the bridesmaid line, pressed my elbow against the safety pin, and told myself I was going to survive this day without a scene. I had been telling myself some version of that my entire adult life. I was very good at it. What I hadn't planned for was Eleanor Whitmore. And what I hadn't planned for before Eleanor was the group chat. The rehearsal dinner was at the Lantern Room in downtown Asheville. Exposed brick, low lighting, the kind of place that makes everyone look photogenic. I was seated between my Aunt Renee and one of Marcus's groomsmen named Todd, who kept trying to explain cryptocurrency to me in the way of someone who had recently started investing and hadn't yet lost anything meaningful. By 9 o'clock, I had a headache. I excused myself, and on the way back from the restroom, I stopped at the table where my mother had been sitting to retrieve my phone. My mother wasn't there. Her phone was, face up. It lit up with a notification from a group chat called Bennett Girls. I should have looked away. Instead, I picked it up. 3 weeks earlier, my mother had sent a photo of the orange dress. Found this in the clearance section. Might be perfect for B. The price tag was visible in the photo. $14,999. My Aunt Renee. That's hideous. It'll swallow her. My mother. That's the point. She should look like she doesn't belong. Because she doesn't. Not really. Tara. Make sure it's a big enough size she can't pin it into shape. I don't want her to fix it. Renee. What about photos? Tara. Already handled it with the photographer. She goes in the back row. If she ends up out of the frame, that's fine too. My mother. Perfect. And remember, if she says anything, the answer is it was the only one left and she should have ordered sooner. Tara. She won't say anything. She never does. She just takes it. One more message from that morning. Don't forget, Marcus's family thinks she's the troubled one. Tara gave them the background, so if she says anything to them, it'll look like she's acting out. I put the phone back face down. The restaurant noise continued around me. Through the brick archway, I could see Tara leaning toward Marcus's great-aunt Patricia with her full, focused smile. I went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists for 3 minutes. Then I went back to my seat and let Todd explain decentralized finance for another 20 minutes and drove to my hotel at 10:15 and sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on. The thing that kept cycling through my mind was that last line. She never does. She just takes it. They said it like a compliment. Like steadiness was a useful quality in a person. And the worst part, the part that kept me up until 2 in the morning, was that they weren't wrong. I had spent 34 years absorbing things. I had made a whole life out of steadiness and quiet and getting on with it. And it had made me apparently very easy to discard. I turned off the light at 2:15. In the morning, I put on the orange dress. The wedding was at Copper Ridge Vineyard, 15 minutes outside Asheville. Rolling hills, a stone chapel, a reception barn with a vaulted ceiling and string lights, and a mountain view in October that looked like a painting. It was objectively a beautiful venue. I arrived at 8:30 for bridesmaid preparation, 7 lavender garment bags on a rack, a makeup artist with a ring light, a mimosa station, 7 women in monogrammed robes, no robe with my name on it. Tara, without looking up from her phone, explained that I'd be getting ready in the room down the hall. It held a mirror propped against a shelving unit and a hook on the wall for my garment bag. I unzipped it alone. The dress was worse in daylight, safety cone orange with a slight synthetic sheen. The size 2XL tag hung from the neckline on a plastic loop. I put it on and stood in front of the propped mirror. I had gotten a haircut for this wedding and had my nails done for the first time in 2 years. I'd packed heels I almost never wear. The dress negated all of that. The shoulders dropped past my arms, the waist sat at my hips, the hem pooled on the floor. I went back to the suite and told Tara the dress was 3 sizes too big and that I'd seen 2 spare lavender gowns on the rack. She looked at me in the makeup mirror. It was the only size left, she said. My mother appeared behind me with her pearl button blazer and the expression she uses when I'm embarrassing her in public. Brooke, she said, please don't do this today. I looked at the 2 lavender gowns still hanging on the rack, close enough to touch. I went back to the storage room and put on the orange dress. The ceremony began at 2. 7 lavender gowns moved down the aisle ahead of me, clicking on the flagstone and dyed to match heels. Then me, in orange polyester and nude pumps, carrying white hydrangeas while everyone else had lavender roses. I heard a murmur from the left side of the guest section. I kept my eyes forward and my hand on the safety pin. From the third row, Eleanor Whitmore watched me cross the aisle. I didn't register the weight of that in the moment. I was focused on getting to my position without the pin giving out. But I remembered it afterward, the way her eyes tracked me from the arch to my spot at the edge of the bridal party, then moved slowly to Tara, then back to me. Not reading emotion, reading information. The ceremony was genuinely beautiful. Marcus's voice cracked on his vows. Tara cried on cue. I stood at the edge of the stone steps and held my hydrangeas. The group portraits went as follows. The photographer positioned 7 bridesmaids, then looked at me and asked me to move to the back row, then to shift left, then, with a vague gesture toward the boxwood hedge, somewhere I couldn't really see from, I stepped out of the frame. 32 photos were taken. I was in none of them. I stood next to a topiary shaped like a sphere and watched. Then I walked to the reception barn and found table 11. Table 11 was near the kitchen door. The centerpiece was eucalyptus and white ranunculus. My place card was there, which confirmed I existed in the venue's official records. The 2 chairs beside me stayed empty all night. The cocktail hour was on the terrace. Tara worked the Whitmore family with the systematic efficiency she's always used in rooms. Eye contact that ran a beat longer than social convention required. The full face listening. The laugh at exactly the right moment. She'd been doing this since she was 19. She was very good at it. I found a spot near the railing and watched. I was close enough to the conversation to hear Tara tell Marcus's great-aunt Patricia about nursing school. She said she'd done it the hard way. Community college first, then the bachelor's program, nights and weekends. She mentioned the clinic, framed as mission-driven, built because she believed primary care was broken. She talked about the membership model, same-day appointments, accessible pricing. Patricia nodded, said it sounded extraordinary, said Marcus was lucky. Tara touched her collarbone, said she believed in earning your place. I thought about Gran's last week, the 3 in the morning confusion, when I'd sit on the edge of the hospital bed for 2 hours explaining over and over that she was safe. The medication log Dana and I kept on a shared Google sheet. The pressure sore on Gran's left heel that I managed in the evenings after 12-hour clinic shifts. The billing reconciliation I did at 11 at night because there was no one to delegate it to yet. Tara had visited 4 times in 2 years and 3 months. I turned back to the railing. I picked up my water glass. I looked at the mountains. I did not go over there. Here is the thing about being the responsible one in a family. You develop a high tolerance for injustice because the alternative is constant chaos, and you learned early that chaos is expensive. Every time I'd named something unfair, as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, the response had been some version of the same message. You're being dramatic. You're making everything about yourself. Can't you just let it go? Said often enough, that message becomes an operating instruction. I had followed it for 34 years. I went to my table and ate my salad. When the entree arrived, Marcus sat down across from me. He'd loosened his tie. He said he was glad I was there, that he knew it was complicated, that Tara needed her family. He said it the way a good man repeats something he's been told to say. I asked what he meant by complicated. He said Tara had told him about the distance between us, about my struggles after Gran passed. He said it gently. He meant it gently. He patted my hand and went back to the head table. I sat at table 11 with the clarity of someone watching a shape finally resolve into what it actually is. She hadn't just borrowed my credentials. She'd installed a replacement in their place. The troubled sister, the one who hadn't handled things well, the one whose presence required management. Anyone I tried to correct would see, instead of the truth, the difficult woman acting out exactly as predicted. It was very well constructed. I finished my chicken and waited for the toasts. I didn't know Eleanor had been making phone calls. What I know about Eleanor's process I learned afterward, from her directly, in a phone call she placed to my clinic 3 weeks after the wedding. She told me she'd started asking questions about 3 weeks before the ceremony, after Tara told her over dinner at the Whitmore family home that she had been her grandmother's primary caregiver in her final years. Tara told it with the specific texture that makes a story feel lived. The medications, the hospital bed, the hand-holding at the end. Eleanor listened to all of it. She told me later, the people who actually do hard things can never separate the logistics from the meaning. The logistics are where the meaning lives. When someone tells you a caregiving story with no logistics in it, no medication names, no scheduling, no sense of the physical labor, they weren't there for the hard parts. Tara's story had all the emotional texture and none of the operational detail. Eleanor also had questions about the clinic. She'd built 2 businesses of her own before 40 and had a nose for the difference between someone describing their own work and someone describing work they've read about. So she made 3 phone calls. The first was to the home health agency involved in Gran's care. The primary family contact across the entire 2-year relationship was listed as Claire Mercer. My cell number, my email, my name on every document. There was no record of a Tara Bennett. The second was to the North Carolina Board of Nursing. Claire Mercer held an active nurse practitioner license. Tara Bennett held no nursing credential. The third was to Janet Cousins, Gran's neighbor on Elmwood Drive for 22 years, a name Eleanor had found in the funeral home's guest registry, which she'd asked to see on a pretext involving a memorial donation. Janet told her everything, that I'd been there every day, that she used to wave to me through the kitchen window when I arrived in the evenings, that she'd brought casseroles twice in Gran's final months, and I was the one who answered the door in scrubs, looking tired, that Tara had visited 3 or 4 times total across the whole period. Janet also told Eleanor something I hadn't known, that after the funeral, Tara had gone to Grand's house with my mother to go through her things and had taken the pearl drop earrings Grand had told me 6 months before she died she wanted me to have. Eleanor sat with all of this for 3 weeks. She didn't tell Marcus. She wanted to see how the Bennett family behaved in public first, whether the lie was Tara's alone or something coordinated. The orange dress answered that. The photographer answered it again. My mother's management of every conversation I tried to enter answered it a third time. By the time Eleanor stood up, she had already made her decision. She just needed the room to be there for it. The toasts began at 7:30. The maid of honor was Ashley, Tara's closest friend since their sorority days at Belmont, where Tara had lasted 3 semesters. Ashley was a skilled public speaker. Her toast had rehearsed pauses. She talked about Tara's incredible journey. A woman who had built a career from the ground up, put herself through school the hard way, cared for her grandmother through her final days without complaint. Resilience, quiet strength, the kind of woman who showed up not for recognition but because it was right. I sat at table 11 and listened to my life delivered as a wedding toast for my sister. I want to be precise about what I felt, not anger. I had passed through the section of the evening where anger lived sometime during the entree. What I felt now was clarity, the specific, unwelcome clarity that arrives when something you've suspected in a diffuse, unformed way for years finally takes its concrete shape in front of you. They had not borrowed my story for the occasion. They had been replacing me with it systematically, across every conversation with the Whitmore family, since before the engagement. A version of me had been circulating in this room all evening, troubled, difficult, managing something that existed specifically so the accomplished version could be assigned to someone else. If I contradicted it, I'd look exactly like the person they'd described. It was a closed loop. Ashley raised her flute. 200 people raised their glasses. I raised my water glass. Across the room, Eleanor Whitmore did not raise her glass. She was watching me, tracking my face through the entire toast with the weather attention I'd noticed at the ceremony. She watched me sit still. She watched me not stand up. She set her napkin down. She placed both hands on her cane, and she stood. The room noticed immediately. Eleanor didn't go to the microphone. She gestured to her great-nephew, took his arm, and walked, not toward the head table, toward table 11. The room tracked her the way a compass tracks north. Conversations faded. Patricia, who Tara had performed for during cocktail hour, turned fully in her seat. My mother went still. Tara's smile held, but the muscles underneath it recalibrated the way I'd seen once before, at Thanksgiving when she was 14, constructing a cover story in real time. Eleanor reached table 11. She released her great-nephew's arm and lowered herself into the empty chair beside mine with the certainty of someone who has chosen exactly where they intend to be. She set her cane against the table. She looked at me. She took my hand. Her grip was precise, the way you hold something you intend to keep. She said, "I want to explain what I've been doing before I say what I'm going to say." She told me about the 3 phone calls, the home health agency, the licensing board, Janet Cousins on Elmwood Drive. She said, "I'm not doing this for drama. I'm doing it because my grandson is about to build a life on the foundation of a lie, and that is not something I'm able to permit." I said I wasn't going to say anything. She said, "I know. That's why I am." Then she squeezed my hand and looked at me the way my grandmother used to in her best moments, direct, without cushioning, just the thing itself. 6 words. "That story belongs to you," said at normal volume, the way you say something true that doesn't require decoration. Then she stood. She walked to the DJ's microphone between the toasts, and the DJ stepped aside and handed it over without being asked. Eleanor held it with the ease of someone who has addressed rooms before. She said she wanted to add a few words, said she'd been so moved by everything she'd learned about the remarkable woman her grandson had chosen, said she'd heard so much about Tara's nursing career, her clinic, her years of caregiving. Then she paused. The specific kind of pause that tells a room something is coming it isn't prepared for. She looked at Tara directly. She said, "I wonder if you could help me clarify something. I've been trying to understand the distinction between a licensed nurse practitioner and a nursing home volunteer, because I pulled the North Carolina Board of Nursing's credential registry this week, and I wanted to make sure I had the right picture." The room processed this for 2 seconds. Then it went quiet in a different way. Tara's smile remained. She was very good at the smile, but her hand moved to the stem of her champagne flute and gripped it. She said, "Eleanor, I think there might be some confusion." Eleanor said, "There's also the matter of the clinic, Ridgeline Health on Merriman Avenue. I visited the website. Very impressive. I noticed a Dr. Dana Kim listed as co-founder, and a Claire Mercer, also as co-founder. I didn't see your name." Tara's hand went white around the stem. My mother crossed the room in 4 seconds. Her fundraiser smile fully deployed. She said, "Mother Whitmore, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is a big day and emotions are running." Eleanor looked at her. Just looked. Didn't raise a hand or raise her voice. She turned her head and held my mother's eyes and said nothing. The silence did everything. My mother's sentence died. Her smile held, but her body stopped, 1 foot ahead of the other, mid-stride, frozen. "I wasn't finished, dear," Eleanor said mildly, as though addressing a minor interruption. She turned back to the room. She said, "I also spoke with the director of the home health agency that supported Claire's grandmother during her illness, and with Janet Cousins, who was Ruth Mercer's neighbor for 22 years. Both conversations were clear about who served as primary caregiver." She turned to me. "The woman in this dress is Claire Mercer, licensed nurse practitioner. She co-founded Ridgeline Health 4 years ago. She put herself through school on overnight hospital shifts. She spent 2 years and 3 months caring for her grandmother, Ruth, in her own home, until Ruth died." Holding Claire's hand, she looked at Tara. "Your bride told my family a different version of those facts. None of what she told them was true." Marcus stood. The chair scraped the barn floor. Loudest sound in the room. "Tara," he said. She didn't answer. For the first time since I'd arrived that morning, her face had nothing performing on it. She looked young. She looked frightened. Tara, is any of this true? She said, she's lying. They're all lying. She came here to ruin this. She meant me. I hadn't said a word. Eleanor said, Claire has said nothing. She's been sitting at the back of the room all evening, but I have made phone calls. Phone calls are harder to explain away than a difficult sister. Patricia, who Tara had spent 20 minutes charming during cocktail hour, pushed back from her table. Robert Whitmore, Marcus's father, stood and looked at Tara for a long moment without expression. My Aunt Renee picked up her purse. Tara looked at the room, at Marcus, at her mother, who was standing with her hands clasped and her eyes on the centerpiece as though the eucalyptus branches contained the instructions for what to do next. Then she looked at me. The mask came off, not dramatically, the way ice comes off a windshield in March from the edges until you're looking through to what's underneath. She said, you always had everything. Her voice was lat, the real voice, the one from when we were children and the door was closed. She said, you got the grades and Grand's attention and the career and it all just came to you. And I had Mom's anxiety and Dad's silence and a college I couldn't finish and debt I couldn't explain to anyone without them looking at me like I was broken. She paused. This was supposed to be my one day. I didn't answer. I thought about what I could say. I thought about Grand and the group chat and the dress. And I made the decision I'd been making my whole life. I let someone else have the last word. Tara picked up her bouquet. She looked at Marcus once. He was already looking back at her with the expression of someone watching an image dissolve to reveal the person underneath and understanding the dissolution is permanent. She walked out the side door. It clicked shut behind her, soft and final. The string lights kept glowing. The jazz quartet, somewhere behind me, quietly set down their instruments. The barn held the silence for about 15 seconds. Then sound came back gradually. A chair, a murmur, a glass being set down, the way a room refills after something has vacuumed the air out of it. Eleanor came back to table 11. She lowered herself into the chair beside mine and set her cane against the table and looked at the centerpiece for a moment. She said, how are you? I said, I don't know yet. She nodded. That was probably the right answer. She said, for what it's worth, I don't take pleasure in any of this. I did what needed to be done for Marcus. You just happened to be telling the truth. I said, that's all right. The truth was available to anyone who looked. She said, most people don't look. Everyone sees what they're told to see and no one goes to the trouble of verifying. She paused. Then, go home and rest. You've been holding that pin in place all day. She touched my wrist briefly, precise, the way you'd check a pulse. Then she walked back to the Whitmore table. My father appeared 3 minutes later. Glenn Bennett is 61. He retired 4 years ago and now golfs and watches cable news, and at family events functions as a benign atmospheric presence, visible, requiring no maintenance, generating no output. He had said 11 words to me that day. You look nice and don't make a fuss and your mother handles these things. All before 11 a.m. He stood beside the empty chair Eleanor had vacated and didn't sit, his hands at his sides, his tie still knotted, his face doing something I didn't have a reference for. After a moment, he said, I should have said something years ago. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it for anything real in a long time. I looked at him. I wanted those words to be the beginning of a real conversation. They weren't. They were just 6 words, said too late to carry much weight, but they were real, which put them ahead of most of what had been said in that barn in the last 24 hours. I said, yeah, you should have. He nodded. He walked back to the head table, where my mother was still sitting with her hands clasped and her eyes on the eucalyptus. Marcus found me a few minutes later. He sat across from me with red eyes and said he was sorry, that he didn't know what he was supposed to do now. I said, I think that's between you and Tara. He nodded. He excused himself to find Eleanor. The caterers moved quietly through the room, clearing plates. The jazz quartet packed up. A few guests drifted toward the exit, speaking in the low registers of people who have witnessed something they are still processing. Nobody came to ask if I was all right. I was all right, but nobody came. I left Copper Ridge at 9:15. I went back to the storage room and changed into the jeans and sweatshirt I'd packed for the drive home, which I always do because I hate arriving anywhere stiff and uncomfortable after a long car ride. I folded the orange dress and put it in the garment bag. I put the garment bag in the back seat of my car. I didn't throw it away at the venue. I've thought about why, and I think it's because throwing it away there would have been a statement, and I didn't have any statements left in me. I just wanted to leave. The drive from Copper Ridge to my house on Kalmia Street is 47 minutes on a normal night. On a clear October night with no traffic, it's 38. I made it in 41, which means I drove slowly, which I do when I'm thinking. I didn't put on the radio. I drove with the windows cracked and the October air coming through, and I thought about all of it. Not in a spiral, not in the way I might have thought about it 5 years ago when I was still carrying the hope that my family would at some point see me clearly. More like reviewing a case, noting the facts, letting the shape of the whole thing settle into something I could hold. Here is what I arrived at, somewhere on the highway between Weaverville and North Asheville. My sister is not a monster. My mother is not a monster. They are people who looked at what I had, the discipline, the degree, the work ethic, the willingness to stay and do the hard thing, and they decided it was available to take, not because they hated me, but because they had spent so long treating my resources as communal property that they'd stopped being able to see the line between borrowing and theft. I had made it easy for them. I had made it easy by never, in 34 years, making it hard. That was my part in it. I'm not interested in punishing myself for that, but I'm also done pretending it didn't happen. I pulled into my driveway at 10:02. I sat in the car for a few minutes in the dark with the engine off. My house is a 1940s bungalow on a quiet street with a big oak in the front yard. The porch light was on because it's always on. I set it on a timer years ago and have never changed it. I thought about Grand arriving here for the first time, looking at this house from the passenger seat of my car, car, saying, "It looks like a house where someone is always home." I went inside. I fed my cat, a large orange tabby named Percent, who has been with me for 7 years and functions as the primary witness to my private life. He assessed me from the kitchen counter and then went back to his food. I hung the garment bag in the hall closet. I thought about what to do with the dress, and I still didn't know, so I left it there. I washed my face, took off my makeup, put on the ancient college t-shirt I've had since 2009 and sleep in approximately 4 nights a week. I made a cup of chamomile tea that I didn't drink. I sat in the armchair in my living room in the dark for about 20 minutes. Then I went to bed. I didn't cry. This surprised me a little. I'd thought I might, but there was nothing left in the tank for that. I slept for 9 hours, which is the most I'd slept in a single stretch in probably 2 years. In the morning, I went for a run. I made eggs. I sat with Percent in the good light from the east window and drank my coffee and watched the oak tree move in the wind. The clinic opened at 8 on Monday. I had a full schedule. I went. The marriage license was never filed. I learned this from Dana, who heard it through a mutual contact in the Whitmore family's social circle. Marcus had asked the officiant to hold the paperwork before anyone left the venue. He took it back 3 days later unsigned. Over the subsequent 6 weeks, in pieces through secondhand channels, Tara had gone to our parents' house in Greensboro after leaving the reception and stayed 2 weeks. Marcus attempted conversations. He is patient, and I believe he tried to understand. Tara couldn't produce an account of herself that didn't require him to accept a version of events the entire Whitmore family had just watched being dismantled. The engagement was formally ended 6 weeks after the wedding. Eleanor called my clinic 3 weeks out. My receptionist buzzed me. I had a moment. Eleanor was brief. She wanted me to know that nothing I'd done that evening had been undignified, and she hoped I hadn't spent any time wondering if she'd overstepped. She'd done what the situation required. I said I was grateful. She said, "Don't be. I did it for Marcus. The truth just happened to be on your side." I said, "I know. That's still a kindness." She asked if I'd like to have lunch sometime, if I was ever in Winston-Salem. I said yes. We met in December at an old-school restaurant with white tablecloths and a wine list the size of a paperback. We talked for 2 hours. She asked about the clinic, really asked the kind of questions you ask when you understand businesses and are genuinely curious. I told her about the membership model and the second location we were considering, and the challenges of recruiting providers to a model most have been trained to regard with suspicion. She said, "My late husband built a textile company in the 60s when everyone told him synthetic fabrics were a fad. I understand building something real that the market hasn't decided to believe in yet." She ordered the duck. She paid before I could and was clearly not going to discuss it. I drove home with the windows down even though it was December because the afternoon had been that good. My mother called twice. The first message, "I hope you're happy with what you did. This is not how families treat each other." The second, "Tara is devastated. If you'd just stayed quiet, this could all have been handled privately. If you'd just stayed quiet." I sat with that for a long time. Then I deleted both messages and blocked her number for 60 days to give myself space. My father called once 2 weeks out. I answered. He said he didn't really know what to say. He said he thought things had been unfair to me for a long time. He said he didn't know what to do about that. I said I didn't either. We talked for 20 minutes, mostly about nothing. The weather, a book he was reading, a problem with the gutters, normal things. It felt strange. It also felt like maybe the beginning of something, though I'm not sure what. I'm not ready to call it a reconciliation, but he called. I answered. We talked about gutters. I'll take it. Tara called once in November from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. She said she didn't hate me. I said I didn't hate her either. She said she knew what she'd done was wrong. I said I knew she knew. A long silence. Then she said, "I don't know how to be different than I am." I sat with that. Then I said, "I think that's the most honest thing you've ever said to me." She didn't respond. She said she had to go. I said, "Okay." She hung up. I don't know what she's doing now. I think she's in Greensboro. I think she's constructing the next move, the next room, the next story. She'll find one. I hope she finds something real instead. That may be optimistic. I've been accused of that before. The orange dress is still in the hall closet. I've opened the garment bag twice, once to look at it and once to take it out and hold it up in the bathroom light and try to decide what I thought about it. It's an ugly dress. Cheap fabric, wrong color, picked by 2 people who wanted me to feel like I didn't belong. It worked for most of the day exactly as designed. I felt small. I felt wrong. I felt like something that had been placed at the edge of the frame specifically to be left out of it. And then Eleanor Whitmore sat down beside me in it, in front of 200 people, and held my hand, and the dress became something else. Not a symbol. I'm not interested in converting my own experience into metaphor. Just a dress in the wrong color that happened to be what I was wearing the night the truth caught up to the lie. I'll keep it for a while, not because I want to look at it, because I want to remember that I wore it through a whole day and didn't become what they needed me to be. I didn't make the scene they'd dressed me for. I sat at the back table in the wrong dress and told the truth when the truth was asked for. That turned out to be enough. Dana asked me about the wedding on Monday morning. I gave her the broad strokes. She listened with her arms folded and the expression she uses when she's taking something seriously. When I finished, she said, "So the grandmother just stood up in the middle of the reception?" I said, "She walked across the whole room, in front of everyone." Dana said, "I love that woman." I said, "I'm having lunch with her in December." Dana said, "Bring me back something." Then she went to see her first patient, and I went to see mine. That Monday, I saw 22 patients. Follow-ups, sick visits, a woman newly diagnosed with diabetes who needed more time than a standard slot allowed, and I gave it to her. A 73-year-old man who comes every month partly because these appointments are the most consistent human contact he has. A 19-year-old coming in for the first time without his parents looking like the bravest person in the room. Real people, real things, trusting me to pay attention. I paid attention. I've been been paying attention my whole career, sitting with someone in the reality of what they're actually dealing with, without lynching, without reframing it as something easier, without telling them to stop being dramatic. That Monday evening, I drove home, fed my cat, made pasta, opened the second location projections on my laptop. The numbers were good, not great yet, but solid and trending, the kind of numbers that belong to something real. I closed the laptop at 9, went to bed. The clinic opens at 8. It always opens at 8. I have always been there when it does. One more thing, and I mean this for whoever needs it. If you are the person in your family who absorbs things, who pins the waist and stands at the back and doesn't make a scene, I understand why you do it. I did it for 34 years. The cost of stopping feels higher than the cost of continuing because stopping is visible and continuing is invisible. And your family has probably already drafted the narrative for what stopping looks like. What I want you to know is that the cost of continuing is also high. It's just distributed differently. It comes out slowly, over years, in the form of being replaced, being borrowed against, being moved to the back of the frame and then out of it, until the version of you that remains is small enough to fit whatever space they've decided to leave. There is no clean answer. There is no moment where it becomes costless to stop. But there are Eleanor Whitmores in the world. People who pay attention, people who ask the right questions out loud in rooms where they can be heard. Sometimes that person is someone else. Sometimes it has to be you. The clinic opens at 8. I have a full schedule tomorrow. I have had a full schedule every tomorrow for 4 years, built appointment by appointment, patient by patient, dollar by dollar, without anyone's help and without anyone's permission. It was the only one left. No, it was mine.